outgoing Secretary General of the Presbyterian Church of East Africa, PCA, Peter Kania, has been buried in Kikuyu, Kiambu County. Reverend Kania, who succumbed to COVID-19 at the Nairobi hospital last week, was buried in accordance.
In a world where grief is sacred and death marks the end of a life's chapter, there exists a shadowy network that sees it as an opening act. Here, death does not often mean quiet sorrow. It means discovering that the SIM card of your loved one has become a weapon of theft. A line, once a connection to life, now used as a tool manipulated by phantom hands. Imagine this: you bury your loved one, their phone switched off, and their affair seemingly at rest. But somewhere in the city, unseen eyes are scanning the obituaries, circling names, and plotting. These are no ordinary thieves. Their prey are not just the living, but the dead. Reverend Peter Kania Kariuki, a respected PCA Secretary General, died on July 26, 2020. Days later, fraudsters hijacked his phone line. Within 2 weeks, thousands of shillings had vanished and his accounts emptied. They even filed a loan in his name and took the money. Then, months later, the very same line was used to rob another grieving family. This was the family of Amos Ngata Muiruri. Amos also had been buried on December 2nd, 2020, and the family lost over Kenya shillings 2.8 million. The trail led detectives into a sinister underworld. This involves obituary trackers, identity theft, insider collusion, SIM-Swap fraud, and graveyard identities. All these used as conduits of crime. Hidden within Kenya's digital shadows, a syndicate thrived, snatching not just digits, but dignity. Their tools involved death notices, stolen IDs, crooked clerks, and the arrogance of familial grief. It's a dark tangled web where the dead are robbed and the living are left to wonder who the next target will be. This is Dark Hour Docs, and this is the story of the dead who robbed the dead. On July 26, 2020, in Nairobi Hospital, the air was thick with the anxiety of a nation deep in the grip of the COVID-19 pandemic. Reverend Peter Kania Kariuki was in the fight of his life. He was the Secretary General of the Presbyterian Church of East Africa, a respected leader, devoted family man, and a shrewd businessman. At this point, the Reverend was no stranger to challenges, but this was one he couldn't outthink or outwork. That morning, the virus claimed him. His death was not just a blow to his family and congregation, but also to the entire nation. It was another grim reminder of a pandemic tearing through the country. In the days that followed, his loved ones moved to protect what was left behind. One of the first acts was simple. They switched off his phone. To them, it was no different from locking away a briefcase or sealing a will in a respectful way to guard his privacy. For 2 weeks, the phone lay dormant, or they thought. When the family tried to turn it back on, something was wrong. The familiar PIN no longer worked, bank apps were locked, and login credentials to the SIM card changed. What they didn't know yet was that Reverend Kania's SIM card had been stolen. It had been virtually lifted from the network and placed into another device controlled by strangers. The transactions told the story. Over Kenya shillings 3 million had vanished. On top of that, a loan application for 500,000 shillings had been submitted in his name after his burial. The DCI was called in, and the investigation revealed something unsettling. This wasn't just a random cybercrime. It was a precision work that required insider help. This may be from a former bank employee or even a clerk from the National Registration Bureau. This meant coordination from people with access to the keys of identity such as ID numbers, dates of birth, and account details. Reverend Kania was gone, but to these criminals, death wasn't an ending. It was an opportunity. On November 22nd, 2020, 4 months had passed since Reverend Kania's death. At Nairobi Hospital, another life was slipping away. This time, it was Amos Ngata Muiruri, a Nairobi businessman. The cause of death was traced to a catastrophic error on the theater desk. A surgery gone horribly wrong that turned the operating room into the scene of a fatal mistake. Just like Peter Kania, Amos was a man of means. Like Kania, he left behind a grieving family, and also, his death did not end his troubles. He was buried on December 2nd at his farm in Donyonjero in Nyandarua County. The family's grief was fresh, but grief would soon give way to shock. Less than a week after the burial, one of Ngata's sons noticed something strange. His father's phone, the one used for mobile banking, had suddenly gone dead. At first, it seemed like a technical issue, so he called the provider. Safaricom quickly reactivated the line and returned it to the family. That's when the truth surfaced. Over 2.8 million shillings had been stolen. Not from one bank, but from 3 major banks where he had owned accounts. These were NCBA, Equity Bank, and Cooperative Bank. All accounts had been drained through mobile banking apps in a carefully coordinated sweep. The transfers had all gone to a single number, 0716-546-633. When detectives traced the line, they couldn't believe it. The number had been registered to Reverend Peter Kania, the man they had buried months ago. So this is what happened. The late pastor's phone line had been reanimated, repurposed, and used to rob another dead man. To the public, it sounded absurd. To detectives, it was proof of something sinister. They weren't chasing random hackers, but an organized network, one that was evolving with every theft they carried out. The more the DCI dug, the more the pattern emerged. Their targets were wealthy. Their deaths had been publicly announced in obituaries. Within days, both their phone lines were hijacked via SIM-Swap fraud, and finally, funds were stolen, loans were taken, and the trail was buried under layers of fake accounts. But perhaps the most disturbing detail was this. In the hands of these criminals, even the dead could become thieves. To the public, the SIM-Swap fraud sounded like something out of a tech thriller. A hacker in a hoodie, and maybe lines of green code scrolling down a screen. But what detectives uncovered was far more unsettling, because it wasn't just faceless hackers. It was people, real people with real jobs, and in some cases, government employees. The syndicate behind the theft of millions from Reverend Peter Kania, Amos Ngata, and dozens of other unsuspecting Kenyans didn't just rely on computers. They relied on something far more dangerous. They had extensive access to records and information. Here's how it worked. First, they scouted their victims, not by hacking databases, but by reading the daily newspaper or searching online. For them, the obituary section became a crucial hunting ground. They looked for a renowned wealthy man and a respected title, say a businessman. For them, this was a life summed up in a few lines of print and a blueprint to wealth. The family would think of it as a tribute, but to the syndicate, it was a menu. Once a target was chosen, their first task was to dig deeper. Using contacts inside their Department of Registration of Persons, they obtained the victim's full identity profile. This means they obtained their ID number, date of birth, address, even the exact phone number linked to their bank accounts. This information was gold. With it, they could call the mobile service provider, impersonate the deceased, and request a SIM replacement. To the provider, the answers to the security questions would match perfectly, as the syndicate had all the personal information. Why wouldn't they issue a new SIM card? That's when the real theft began. The moment the new SIM was active, the syndicate had control of the victim's mobile number. That number was the master key and the link to every mobile banking app. It also served as a link to every SMS verification code and every account recovery option. But they didn't stop at draining existing balances. No, they went further. Using the victims' accounts, they applied for instant loans from mobile money lenders. Within hours, the money was moved, split into smaller transactions, and sent to mule accounts. These were banks and mobile lines controlled by lower-level members of the syndicate. By the time the family noticed, it was too late. The phone number was dead again, the funds withdrawn, and the trail cold. The structure of this network was disturbingly professional. There were scouts who identified targets and insiders who provided personal data. Also, there were tech operatives who executed the SIM swaps. Then cash was handled by another group that was tasked with withdrawing and laundering stolen money. But there was one more chilling layer to the operation: recycling. The syndicate didn't just steal from one victim and discard their line. They kept it sometimes for months. Reverend Kania's number, for example, wasn't just used to drain his own account, it was reactivated to clean out Amos Ngata's accounts too. In other words, in the records of banks and mobile providers, the dead were committing new crimes. And the real thieves were watching from the shadows, smiling at the chaos. When detectives finally pieced together the chain, they had 5 prime suspects in custody. These were Eugene Sivachi, Eutychus Mutembei, Maurice Koome, Jane Washuka, and Clara Davies. But they knew this was only the tip of the iceberg. Because if a syndicate could steal from the living and the dead, who was safe? Detectives at the Directorate of Criminal Investigations had been chasing shadows. The victims varied, one a pastor, the other a businessman, and even elderly pensioners. But the method was always the same. A death had to be announced, often through a printed obituary, and then within hours or days, the robbery would occur. A SIM swap would occur, bank accounts emptied, and loans taken in the name of the dead. The breakthrough arrived when the Ngata family refused to accept tragedy and theft as unrelated events. After their father's death and 2.8 million gone, one thing stood out. The phone line used to drain the mobile banking apps traced back to Reverend Peter Kania. That paradox cracked the case wide open. With that clue, the DCI's operations branch, the Crime Research and Intelligence Bureau, CRIB, and the Special Service Unit, SSU, converged. Across Nairobi and beyond, they pulled at trends leading to safe houses, cash pickups, and stacks of SIM cards. In some cases, detectives found themselves at graveyards, literally in rural Kenya. They had underestimated the urgency these criminals had assigned to their timeline. They struck before families had even cleaned up funeral proceedings and before bank balances were known. Each layer revealed more. The syndicate didn't just target the dead. They looked at people with minimal suspicion, such as the elderly, travelers abroad, and wealthy elites. They harvested personal data such as ID numbers from insiders. Through this, they were able to impersonate the dead, convince mobile providers to issue new SIM cards, and hijack two-factor authentication. These were not lone wolves. They were an organized machine with scouts, insiders, collaborators, tech operatives, and money mules. The recycled numbers were also later used to siphon funds from other deceased people in a case of a dead man robbing another. Ultimately, the 5 individuals mentioned earlier stood at the eye of the storm: Eugene Sivachi, Eutychus Mutembei, Maurice Koome, Jane Washuka, and Clara Davies. They were arrested and arraigned in Nairobi's Milimani law courts. Yet the DCI acknowledged this was just the beginning, as more suspects were still at large. This was through the dozens of victims identified across Kenya. But the case had broader resonance. Other investigations sprang to life, involving hundreds of fraudulent SIM cards, cloned identities, and mobile devices flagged across different frauds. In one recent incident, investigators arrested 4 crypto scammers in Kahawa in possession of 1,336 SIM cards. This is a sign that the ecosystem of digital crime is widespread and growing by the day. Tying it further to the early 2025 case of the Mulot-based fraudsters, commonly renowned as the Mulot gang.
The Directorate of Criminal Investigations has unveiled the mastermind of the now famous Mulot SIM-Swap Syndicate in the county of Bomet. One of the victims of the fraud was also in the security sector, had earlier warned that there is more than just...
In the shadowy heart of Kenya, whispers of the Mulot gang linger like a chilling echo. At the crossroads of Bomet and Narok, this involves youths armed not with guns but stolen identities and corrupt insider access. They hijack SIM cards and siphon mobile money with uncanny precision. Often, even officials with access to personal data play a role, tipping the scales in their favor. As one Redditor once, there is a reason we say fear Mulot boys. Those chilling words carry the weight of countless drained accounts and vanished money. With every SIM swap, the line between tech and terror blurs, and the network pulls tighter around you. They remain unseen, yet merciless. However, for our case, even while in custody, SIM swap fraud had not paused. A forensic report uncovered how the SIM card of ex-OCS, Samon Talam, was hijacked while he was held in jail. It was replaced, reused, and trafficked through other devices to continue financial fraud. Every case laid bare the same terrifying truth. In Kenya's digital age, death or detention is not protection. Identity and connection can be surged, switched, and weaponized in the hollow between grief and follow-up. In this shadow market of grief, even death offers no sanctuary. In the world these syndicates inhabit, the final breath is not an ending, it's an opening. They watch the obituaries the way predators watch a watering hole, waiting for the vulnerable to gather. The moment a life ends, they strike. Not with knives or guns, but with stolen identities, hijacked SIM cards, and invisible hands reaching into accounts. The stories of Reverend Peter Kania and Amos Ngata prove an unsettling truth. The dead can be made to rob the dead. Not by will, not by choice, but by the greed of the living. Men and women who view mourning not as a sacred passage, but as the perfect cover for plunder. Families must now guard more than memories. They must guard the digital ghost of those they love. Their phone numbers, IDs, and bank access. This is because in the data dark, these are treasure maps for the vultures that wait. And for these vultures, the grave is not the end, it is only the beginning. This has been Dark Our Dogs, and if you found this story compelling, like and share. Remember to stay alert.